Okay, this one is called The Arrogance of the Apostate. Matthew chapter 25, verses 41 to 46. Then Yeshua will say to those at his left hand, "Be gone from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Why? Well, for I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me and entertain me. You didn't even want to talk to me. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. I'm going to stop here. I'd like to share with you how I interpret this sentence. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. When I read this, I also read, I was full of shame and condemnation from those who abused me, and you just turned a blind eye and made no effort to cover my shame at the hands of my oppressors. I was sick and in prison. I was imprisoned by my malignant narcissistic abuser. And you did not visit me with help or any type of ministering care. And then those who Yeshua was talking to in their turn will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry? I never saw you hungry. When did we see you thirsty or a stranger? When did we ever see you naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?" And he will reply to them solemnly, "I declare to you, insofar as you failed to do it for the least of these, insofar as you failed to do it for those who are considered least in the estimation of men, you failed to do it for me." Give me 1 minute. I forgot to turn my fans off. Okay, I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. These are the words of Yeshua. And he says the following, Learn of me, for I am gentle, I am meek, I am humble." This is Yeshua talking about himself. This is his personality. "I am lowly in heart." Okay, here's what I wrote. "When you do it to the least of these, my brethren, you do it unto me." Principle is truth on many levels. In other words, whatever you do, however you treat the least in this world, Yeshua takes it as your treatment of him personally. This is a principle. And it is truth on a lot of levels. Now, through the lens of blood covenant, which is the type of relationship God has with his little ones, with you and me, a blood covenant, that principle is very simple and blunt. If you come at my friend, and friend with a capital F, if you come at my friend, if you attack my friend, my covenant brother, one way, I will come after you 7 ways. And this is the way God thinks about his own. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. This is another way God says of his own, that the way they treat the least of you is the way they treat me. Now, I'd like to present another possible way of looking at this. If they failed to do kindness for the least of these my brethren, they failed to do it for me. This is the legal argument utilized by the Messiah in his judgment of the goats. I took this from the parable Yeshua used in Matthew 25 concerning the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Okay, I hope this is coming out right. I didn't proof this very carefully because I've been itching to get a lesson out. Okay, Yeshua's identification with the segment of society ignored, if not held in outright contempt by the ruling class, both the secular and the religious ruling class, is not only based on the bond of relationship that exists between he and his own. And again, that bond of relationship is blood covenant. Jesus' identification with that segment of society targeted, persecuted, and even destroyed by power-grabbing apostates and malignant narcissists of all shapes and sizes is an identification built upon the man Jesus himself. Jesus wasn't lying when he called himself lowly in heart. He really is lowly in heart. Yeshua truly and really is meek, gentle, and humble of spirit. And the point I'm going to attempt to make is this. Narcissists with power, and by power I mean influence, would treat Jesus the same way they treated so many of us. Jesus had and has the characteristics and personality traits that attract abuse, if not outright persecution, from ungodly, wicked men. Wicked men harbor great hostility against their Maker. God has given wicked men over to reprobate minds, and they will be in this state forever. And they hate God for this. Those who are truly humble in spirit, like Yeshua, are the target of choice for the man with Antichrist personality disorder. Yeshua said things like this to his disciples all the time. If they hated me, they'll hate you too. And the same principle is true in reverse. If they hate you, understand that they would hate me too. Excuse me. I can almost hear Yeshua saying, do you see the way those people look at you with contempt when you walk into the room? Well, they would look at me the same way if I were to walk into the same room. We share the same reverence for God and truth. Now, this is what I hear the Master saying. I can hear Yeshua saying this. This makes you the enemy to the narcissist that is abusing you. This makes you an enemy to the narcissist. The fact that you love and revere truth like I do. I can almost hear his spirit whispering into my ear that the narc is taking his hostility toward me out on you. Messiah, Jesus, is the most humble, meek, kind, and gentle man who ever lived and ever will live. Now I want to talk about the guy who is not the humblest, meekest guy in town. I want to talk about the apostate preacher who operates a so-called church, which is actually a for-profit cult. And he does it in the name of Yeshua. And let's start by looking at a verse from the book of 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 17 to 22. These people, these false prophets and teachers among you, these apostates among you, they love to speak empty, boastful words. Please make a note of that word, boast. They appeal to the desires of the flesh. They entice people by appealing to the desires of their flesh, by promising them freedom. These apostates, if at one time they happen to escape the corruption of the world by knowing the Messiah, but they are once again entangled in the world, and they are worse off at the end than they were at the beginning. It would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than to have known it, and then to turn their backs on the sacred command that was passed on to them. Again, Peter's talking about apostates. Apostates are men and women who were actually called and chosen by God. They were actually dealt with by the Spirit of God. And they turned their back on him. And they cast the revelation that God gave them. They cast away the knowledge that God was attempting to instill in them. They cast it away. They buried it. Like the guy who buried his talent. They treated the knowledge of God. I'm talking about apostates. They treated the knowledge of God like you would a dead thing. And they threw it into the ground and shoveled dirt on top of it like a corpse, like a dead body. Okay, I spent the last couple of days reading articles on big-name ministers in the evangelical community embroiled in scandals that include sexual abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, and the cover-up of evil among members of their staff. And if there was one common thread I was able to recognize among all of them, it was this. It was their arrogance. It was their lack and want of humility and lowliness. These men embroiled in scandal were men whose mouths were filled with empty boasting, just as we read about in Peter. Boasting about their own abilities, boasting and bragging about their own ministries and influence. And all of their boasting was based on human standards and human ideas. The world, in other words. One of the big name apostates I read about referred to entry-level hotel workers as twerps. As twerps in a staff meeting whose content was made public in a court deposition. Now, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, a twerp is a person regarded as insignificant and contemptible. Twerp is another word for twit, a small and puny person. Small, insignificant. And I think I could also insert a word that Yeshua used to describe the people that this mega minister looked upon as contemptible, the least among us. Based on the scripture that we've looked over, I think I can safely say this big name apostate would have referred to Yeshua himself with the same contemptible term he held for hotel workers. Yeah, I think he would have called Jesus a twerp. You see, Jesus did not and does not come off as a king or a great man. Jesus comes off the way he actually is. Humble, gentle, and lowly. Narcissists hate the lowly. Apostate preachers especially hate the lowly of heart. Apostate preachers hate those who hold jobs of lowly degree. They're of little to no use to them. Those who hold lowly positions of employment in this world means that they can offer little to nothing in the way of monetary blessing for their ministry. The lowly of this world are bad for the image of the apostate's ministry. They don't present the worldly image of what it means to be blessed. The lowly are bad for business. But it's worse than that. There are men and women genuinely lowly of heart who possess a degree of worldly influence and money. But don't worry, even the lowly of heart who may have a little money, they'll be hated by the apostate as well. And I'll show you why from the first chapter of Romans. Romans 1, verse 30. Romans chapter 1, verse 30. Please look this one up. Those who God has given over to a reprobate mind are rude, haughty, conceited, proud, and arrogant. They are boastful and they brag about themselves. They hate God. That's the one I want you to underline. They hate God. Whether the humble man has money or not doesn't matter. Once the apostate recognizes any degree of humility resident in the heart of someone, his hatred toward God is going to rear its ugly head in the direction of that person. The malice toward God that burns in the heart of every narcissist is triggered by the least among us, whether they have money or influence or not. And I always use Johnny Carson as an example of this. Most of you probably know Johnny Carson is. To this day, Carson is untouchable as the greatest TV personality who ever lived, and it's not really debatable. Yet, his own mother never missed, and this is documented. You don't have to research hard to find this out. His own mother never missed an opportunity to instill shame into Johnny's heart until the day she died, even at the peak of his popularity. Why is this? Well, she couldn't help it. She was a narc. The spark of humility that existed in Johnny's heart acted like a trigger in the heart of his mother. The humility that existed in his heart, irrespective of his fame and fortune. It triggered the hatred toward God that existed in the heart of his mother. And she directed that hatred toward her son. It didn't matter how much fame and money he accumulated. And I believe that's what drove Johnny Carson, a desire to please Mom. And this is a sad story. It's no wonder his personal life was a wreck. No, the apostate minister, or any malignant narcissist for that matter, hates God. He hates God with a venom that we cannot begin to imagine, and consequently, he's going to hate those who are accepted by God, the meek and the lowly, the least among us, God's little ones, in other words. And it won't matter how much money or fame they have, a lot or a little, it doesn't matter. I had this thought when I was writing this just a few minutes ago. About psychology, how modern psychology in the world, they recognize this hatred in the heart of every narcissist. It's pretty obvious. It's apparent to see. All the stories they hear from victims of narc abuse, talking about psychologists, all of the stories they hear from their victims make it self-evident that malignant narcissists harbor malice and hatred universally, actually. They have universal hatred towards other people, particularly those who are innocent and endeavor to be good, decent humans. They hate them. But they can't define, modern psychology is unable, in my opinion, to define and recognize where this hatred's coming from and where it's directed. They've got hate. They recognize that narcs possess an unreasonable level of hate, but they can't figure out its source and its direction. I think because of this, they almost automatically assume that hatred that exists in the heart of these personality disordered people is directed at themselves. It's got to be self-hatred. It's got to be shame-based. This hatred towards others has got to be shame-based. Well, it's not. Modern psychology has failed to recognize, and I'm not blaming them. I'm not knocking them. Don't get me wrong. It's amazing they've been able to recognize as much as they have, because narcissism is a spiritual condition. There's nothing psychological about it. It's spiritual. And it's based on the fact that they have rejected the light of God. As a result of this, God turned them over to their own hearts and minds. And a heart deprived of the light of God is a very, very dark heart. And the key characteristic and distinguishing factor of that heart that has rejected the knowledge of God is hostility toward God. The Bible word to describe this hostility against God is ungodliness. And if you research that word ungodly, you will discover that's what the word means. Hostility toward God. The spirit of Antichrist. Psychology recognizes that this personality disordered individual has hatred. Hatred exists. It's self-evident. But they have been unable to recognize the origin of that hate and the source. It's not self-hatred. It's hatred against their Creator, the one that they rejected, and the one who turned them over to a reprobate mind. So I'm hoping, if there's one thought I hope you come away with in this lesson, it's that the way you were treated by that apostate minister who told you to go ahead and forgive and love your wicked abuser, that wicked oppressor, chances are he's an apostate. Good chance he's an apostate, someone who once had a knowledge of God and walked away from it. Now he hates God. And my point is, he would probably say there's a real good chance that he would treat Yeshua, the Messiah, himself the same way. Because that same spirit that resides in you that loves truth, which is a spirit of humility, that same spirit that resides in you that triggered the abusive person, that same humble spirit, that same spirit that loves light and reality exists in Yeshua. They would hold Yeshua in the same contempt they do you, because he's humble. It's hard for our minds to grasp that Jesus is a servant. I've heard this expression used even in some of the places I've worked. I've heard managers say, I have a servant's heart, which is a bunch of bull. But in our Savior, in Yeshua, it's absolutely true. He has a servant's heart. He truly did and does to this day give up his life, gives up his wants and his needs and his desires for the sake of his sheep and his people. That's who he truly is. Now, don't get me wrong, he's still King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we're going to find that out real soon. He's coming to set up his kingdom. In fact, the proverb, or parable, I should say, the parable that we read from in Matthew 25 is the early stages of when Yeshua begins to establish his earthly kingdom. And the first thing he's going to do is root out all of the narcissists and reprobates and apostates. That's going to be first order of business for the Son of David, for he who's going to sit upon the throne of David. But his heart, the essence of Yeshua, the essence of God, is humility. I am so glad that our God is humble and lowly of heart. Amen.